What's up, everyone? My name's Splice tonight. Welcome back to another Reflections. I know it's been a while. I know I've been kind of just MIA for the most part off of YouTube. And I don't have a really good excuse either, so I'm sorry, I guess. I haven't had the inspiration to really finish this video, and now that the new RWBY Volume 6 trailer with Adam just came out, I'm actually feeling weirdly hyped for the new season to come out. But this video is not going to be addressing any of that. That'll probably be a next video or something like that. But today's video is actually going to be addressing the most popular ship in all of the RWBY fandom, and that is, as you might have guessed by the title, Bumblebee. Now, I've had to actually rewrite this particular theory a few times just because some of the psychology research that I was doing had come out with further information that better informed a lot of what I was trying to get across, and some things that I've noticed just sort of in general. So they actually came out with a psychological article regards to the whole idea of shipping itself. Now, the idea of shipping is something that we've seen for decades at this point. We saw it with Ross and Rachel, we saw it with How to Meet Your Mother, and all the cast members across the board there. And we've seen it with so many different other things.
It's a hidden
reward.
That at this point, it's just become part of our culture, and this is no more clear than in RWBY. Now, the article that I was reading specifically from Psychology Today, and I will link in the description all the articles that I'm specifically talking about. One of the things that they mentioned specifically was that the idea of shipping, while a lot of the people who are on behind the scenes working on stuff are fully aware of shipping, and they kind of put in all these minor hints to different emotional arcs for different characters and things for people to sort of pick up on. One of the major things that they've noticed psychologically with shipping is that there's a tendency towards ignoring very clear, blatant information that otherwise derails a ship. So for example, Sailor Moon and Sailor, for example, Mars, the fact that, at least in the original, before it got uber censored by the US, was actually in a relationship with another one of the Sailor Scouts, who was not Sailor Moon. So she was actually in a relationship with Sailor Uranus. This is the point, that people tend to misrepresent information and plead their case in such a way that kind of just illegitimizes anyone that they disagree with. And this is a problem. First of all, from a writing perspective, it kind of sets people up to be much more upset with the source material than they have any real right to be, because they've been given these sort of indications that things are going to happen, but they've also been given indications that these sorts of relationships are incredibly toxic or really bad ideas. And one of the clear examples of this is the strength of the Bumblebee fandom. Now, I'm not going to be talking about examples where the Bumblebee fandom has, for example, harassed people online who might have suggested any sort of insubordination, who might have been close to the cast and stuff like that. Or I'm not going to talk about how, for example, in other fandoms like Steven Universe, people have been put to some pretty aggressive intimidation tactics based on information that the fans were very much in support of, and ended up instigating some rather fucked up results. Now, today what I'm going to be actually talking to you guys about is the fact that within the RWBY universe, the idea of Blake and Yang getting together is not only a bad idea that will probably happen because the fans love this idea, because if we're honestly just being straight up, the idea of these two girls who are incredibly beautiful women are really, really hot as a pairing. That's what a lot of people tend to go off of, and there's one specific scene that most people tend to reference as far as why they think that they would make a great pairing, and it's specifically the scene between Blake and Yang, where Yang essentially tries to call out Blake for overworking towards trying to find Roman Torchwick, who is at the current time in that timeline working with the White Fang. Now, this particular conversation is lauded as the greatest example of Bumblebee being a huge element of the canon for the show and is definitely the end goal for a lot of people. Now there have been people like the Unicorn of War who say, oh, they're just so adorable, oh, they have to get together, and they've cobbled together some relatively weak arguments for their case. Now that's not to say that they can't have that. Obviously, they can have their AUs, they can have their fanfictions, they can have their AMVs that represent this, they can have all kinds of different things that essentially allow for their personal fantasy and their version of reality to work, but that doesn't mean that it's likely to happen within the canon. Now, obviously, fan interpretation and fan favor is definitely going to influence at least a little bit where the characters develop and evolve and how they change as characters, but I think ultimately putting Yang and Blake together is a really bad idea, and this is actually something evidenced and backed up in psychology. If you look at most relationships that work well and work solidly because of who they are as people, you don't actually see a lot of complementary examples. Now, there have been studies that have said complementary couples work really well, they're consistently divorced, or they're evident in lifelong partners. So the actual evidence to say that complementary partners are a good thing or a bad thing are kind of mixed. But what I mean by complementary is characters who have traits who kind of are the exact opposite of each other. So for example, we have Blake, who is a stealth operator. She is dependent on her ability to avoid attacks and get away from attacks. And we have Yang, someone who's very much an aggressive forward fighter, who's more interested in going through her obstacles than her opponents, and who is absolutely defined by her tenacity and her ability to actually, first of all, tank attacks and throw them back in the face of her opponents. That's literally how her semblance is built.
With each hit, she gets stronger, and she uses that energy to fight back.
And the sort of being able to dodge attacks and run from issues is kind of how Blake's semblance is actually conceptualized. And this is actually mentioned not just in the conversation that they have one-on-one, but in general, that Blake's semblance is essentially built on her personal cowardice. Now, that's not to me saying that she's worth girl, even though personally I do have that opinion of her as the more we kind of learn about her up until the Volume 6 trailer with Adam, we get the sense that the more she gets developed, the less redeemable she is as a character. And that's kind of frustrating for me because I would like to not be as pissed with Blake as I am. But anyway, that's kind of irrelevant. My opinions don't really matter in the regards to psychology. So looking at the actual psychology of the relationships, we have two people who are very complementary, which in the dynamic of a team where one person is able to compensate for your own weaknesses, this is huge. However, generally, in a lot of cases psychologically, the tendency is for this to actually mean that you don't have a level of commonality. So if you don't have at least some through line of common interests, you're going to have a much weaker relationship. So this is kind of exemplified in people where they're both highly nerdy, but they're very nerdy in their specific area that they both have similar commonalities. So for example, people who are very much into anime will get much better along with people who are also at least somewhat into anime. Now you could make the argument, of course, that because they're both huntresses, they have a commonality thread there, which is fair, but that's kind of a broad stroke, and you could say that applying to everyone. Which, if you look at the shipping chart, is enough reason for everyone to be shipped with everyone. But, that being said, one of the things that I've noticed between Blake and Yang is their entire attitude is completely different. And this isn't even with me actually addressing the fact that there is some serious PTSD issues that Yang has to deal with on a number of different levels.
Brand new, state-of-the-art Atlas tech. You know, I thought I was gonna have to pull some strings, call in a few favors, but you earned this one all on your own, kiddo.
Huh?
It's, first of all, she is, as a person, consistently taking care of people, whether it's RWBY, whether it's her father and the fact that he essentially had no way to recover after Summer Rose died, or left him, or whatever the canon reason is or will end up being in the future. She had to take care of them. She's also, having to deal with the revelation that Summer Rose, someone she called her super mom, is not actually her mother, or genetically her biological mother, which left her with a very, some have compared it to a "are you my mother" kind of complex, but basically a need to understand her roots and who she is as a person on a sort of biological level, but also on a where do I get some of the things that I don't see is common between me and my dad. Now that's based on a common idea of wanting to know yourself a little better and to be able to better self-actualize, which means to better understand yourself and understand how to better yourself in future and become a more overall just better person. And this is common all over the place, and it's actually in a lot of ways how character development itself kind of starts or begins or should be put forward. Now the interesting thing is that this behavior is something where she's been abandoned a lot of times. First of all, by her father. Second of all, by her, primarily by her mother. Second of all, by her father when her surrogate mother, super mother, Summer Rose dies. And then later on by Blake when she dips on the team because she has some reservations regards to how Weiss is treating her, and being the daughter of the Schnee Dust Company inheritance and the whole company and everything that she's had to deal with politically in that regard. And then you also had the fact that she ran out on the entire team, and specifically Yang, who just lost her arm for this girl. And of course, when you learn more about her, you realize that she ran out on her parents, and she also ran out on Adam. Now, Adam, a lot of people are going to be hard-pressed to disagree with this decision, given that he was a radical extremist in his own group. Even though they were kind of slightly tinted towards that, he was a much more extreme iteration of that idea. Now, so you make sense of that, you go, okay, that's a very rational decision. But when you look at the fact that she's run out on people she does not feel support her ideas, or more importantly, people who she feels like she cannot talk to, or people she cannot defeat. This is actually evident in how with Roman, she tried to address the issue, and when it didn't go well, she didn't know how to cope with it and ended up going out on her own. Now, of course, you have people who are like Sun, who actually call her out on her bullshit.
You think you're being selfless, but you're not. Yeah, that chameleon friend of yours got me pretty good. But I'd do it all again if it meant protecting you. You can make your own choices, sure. But you don't get to make ours.
But for the most part, she's not actually had to make up for this, so this behavior has been pretty pattern of who she is as a person. Now, of course, you look at Yang, you realize people that have run out on her, and the fact that Blake has a history of running out on other people, you kind of realize that they would not mesh very well as far as day-to-day interactions, as far as their approach to dealing with their emotional and their more socio-political issues. They have very different approaches, so they would end up doing a lot more clashing than cohesion, which in a relationship is huge. If you don't have the capacity to see past your own issues and compromise in some degree, then you tend not to be able to very well develop a relationship. Now, this could be said on the same side that Yang and Blake will not see eye to eye. You could say that because of their differing opinions, they're able to, give something new and different to the relationship and add a more fluid dynamic. And that's entirely fair to say that, but realistically, given the psychology behind a lot of this, it's unlikely that these relationships are going to be very healthy or will last very long. The majority that I was able to find in a similar kind of vein or a similar behavior are more likely to be destructive. There was more evidence pointing towards a destructive behavior than not. But again, some of that evidence is a little bit difficult to view as fully empirical, so that's something to be aware of. So most of those kind of issues out of the way, let's talk about the other kind of reason that Bumblebee is most often in the limelight. The fact that it's a representation ship for the LGBTQ plus community. Now, I'm completely behind the idea of having more representation. However, I am also very much in the vein of let it be better written. For example, they have an amazing LGBTQ plus character in the actual show in the form of Ilya.
I was always jealous of the way you looked at him. I wanted you to look at me that way.
And she's actually written out in a way that doesn't feel hyper-forced. Now, there are some people who are critical of her characterization, and that's totally fair. You can have your own issues with it. If you have a problem with it, that's totally up to you, and a lot of the times it is kind of subjective whether you like a character or not, but I think she's relatively well written, and as a result, I think she's a good example of representation of the community within the RWBY-verse. Now, that said, I don't think that Bumblebee is a good representation. I think that it will more than likely lean on way too much happenstance to make this relationship feel grounded and realistic, mainly because of what I previously mentioned as far as the psychological issues, as far as the fact that if Blake and Yang ever really got into a heavy disagreement, it's likely to go down much like the first time that they've had a real conversation and fight regards to going after Torchwick and essentially just blowing off most of what Yang said and just sort of delaying for the day. So knowing that, you kind of have to feel like, first of all, not really anything of what Yang says ever really seems to stick, whereas with other characters like Sun, the words that they actually say do seem to, at least so far, stick. We'll see whether or not that's consistent or invalidating a lot of what Sun was attempting to get across, or whatever the case may be. But I'm not saying that I'm a fan of Black Sun versus Bumblebee. That's not irrelevant. I just think psychologically it's a better choice for Black Sun as far as better development of characters, because Sun acts in a way where he both takes in the criticism and listens to Blake on a human level, but is also not afraid to call her out on some of her weaker arguments and her reasons for being kind of a coward and not being willing to let her kind of use her excuses as a way to get out of her problems. And I think that's a very healthy dynamic, because when you're able to more accurately address issues, and of course on top of accurately addressing, you can actually not cause a dramatic confrontation. Now, as far as my final thoughts, let's just be honest. If you are interested in the characters as far as a visual appeal aspect, that's totally fine. I mean, I get why you find them attractive to be together. That's totally up to you, totally fine in that regard. But if you look at them as actual characters and the developments that they've had, the idea of Bumblebee just, first of all, it's a little creepy, but it's also just kinda toxic to have that kind of behaviors meshing in a way that isn't a team dynamic where they will have some level of moderation. Now, this is also saying that people who have highly similar behaviors get along better, both in friendships and in relationships. And that's actually why best friends tend to be amazing significant others, most typically, and also the fact that when you have such complementary behaviors, it works well in a team, but it doesn't work well in a relationship because the two characters are so different, or the two people are so different. A lot of the interactions end up having a bit of a clash, and having these sort of clashes tends to wear down on the people. You know, and also, of course, you have the fact that there's a lot of PTSD involved, specifically with Yang, but also with the events that Blake has gone through, and the way that they sort of adapted is hugely different and it speaks a lot to their behaviors as people. Anyway, guys, if there's anything else you guys want to add, if you guys think my opinion's totally shit or crazy or whatever, please let me know in the comments down below. I have no problem with that. I realize that a lot of what I'm saying here might have been repetitive or rambly, so I would totally appreciate it if you guys would let me know what I can do better for the next video. But anyway, guys, with that said, thank you so much for watching. My name is Splice Knight. Again, the information for the studies and everything else will be in the description, so check those out. If you like this video, don't forget to hit subscribe, the notification bell, and follow me on social media as is appropriate, because I will always be there and you guys can shit talk me online. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. My name is Splice Knight. Have a great day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Hopefully relatively soon, but we'll see. Peace.